Sorry.
That was gross. And impressive.
My mom does it too.
I know. She belches like a trucker.
Recorded.
Your child inherited that from you. Like the apple got stuck in that tree. Stuck in that tree. Wow, that was impressive.
Hey guys, welcome to Messy Minds. How are you, Chelsea?
I'm really good. How are you, babe?
I'm good.
Good.
I'm good.
Good.
I'm stressed.
Yeah?
Yeah, I'm tired. I'm stressed. Work is a lot recently. Yeah.
Work tends to be a lot when it tries to become your life instead of just a job.
Well, the thing is, I'm a respiratory therapist that transferred into the career right at the beginning of a respiratory pandemic.
Very true. Very true.
So there are, as we have spikes, times where I'm really, really stressed out at work, and emotionally drained, and physically drained as well. This last weekend I worked 4 days because it was the holiday, and I worked Thanksgiving, and it feels to me like it's the beginning of a nice big spike here.
Yeah, it's about that time of year. 'Tis the season.
Hopefully it doesn't seem to be quite the magnitude that last year's winter spike was, thankfully. But it is definitely a significant increase in activity in the hospital and in the ICU specifically.
And that is an increase in your workload.
Right, and
Directly.
and it's a large increase in the amount of death I'm seeing per day as well, which is it's really emotional. I mean,
That's disheartening.
not to make it about me, because it's not about me, but
No,
it's really emotionally draining.
Well, it's...
As well as physically draining, because it's a lot of CPR.
You're grieving multiple people. And, like, I get it that, like, that is really... It's an emotional time for the families, obviously, but,
Right.
like...
It's not the same kind of grief. Because,
It's not.
Because I don't know these
compounded.
people, and whatever, but humans aren't supposed to see death on a magnitude like that.
Nor... Honestly.
It's, like, watching people die is traumatizing. Not to mention, I'm actively trying to save their life.
And it's not like... Exactly.
Like, I'm on them doing
like,
CPR,
that's
trying
really
to save their
disheartening
life.
to your success rate as far as your job goes. You do well
Right.
at your job, more people live.
Right, and
Well, and I mean, that's
I
not
went
like...
into this wanting to help people and make people better. Like, that's always my goal.
It's always
you know?
altruistic.
And so it's just when you have so many cases where there's very little hope, it really just takes a toll on you.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's where I'm at right now. But luckily, everything else in my life is going well. So
Hey, just one thing.
Yeah, so I can really just focus on that when it needs to be focused on.
Yeah.
And not be distracted by anything else going wrong in my life.
Yeah.
So how have you been?
Well, I'm really good. Work's great. Things kind of fix themselves thanks to a heavy push from me. And everybody's really happy right now. We have our Christmas party coming up. Like, everyone's work ethic is on the uphill. Like, everyone's like, I guess, what's the word that I'm thinking of when it comes to your satisfaction with where you're at in your job? Like, there's like a word for like employee satisfaction in particular. Happy to
Morale.
be there. Morale, thank you.
Morale.
Yes. So morale's up. Mm-hmm. Like, it just, everybody's really happy right now. Things
awesome.
Personally are really great. Yeah, exactly.
That's fantastic.
And that's really hard to right now, in particular when there's like labor shortages everywhere. So like, you know, but I did have a kind of really big, like, momentous thing happen. I refiled for divorce, and that's in the process of going through right now. It's huge.
Congratulations.
I mean,
Cheers.
cheers to that.
Cheers.
It's
we
huge.
love divorces to toxic men in this
We definitely
house.
do. We definitely do. It was a long time coming, and I think I'm still processing a lot of it because it was a really long and tumultuous road to get to this point. So there's still a lot that I'm working through, but there is a moment in particular that happened on Thanksgiving, and a boundary of mine was crossed, and I guess that's a really good segue into, we'll get to that because today's topic is all about boundaries.
Boundaries.
Yay, boundaries. Boundaries. So,
So I
Bri,
guess,
what's a boundary?
I mean, clearly a boundary is something that you put in place to protect yourself or your feelings or whatever. I think that one of my biggest boundaries, especially after coming out of my last relationship, was like, I won't fight the way I used to anymore.
Yeah.
That won't happen.
Yeah.
We won't be yelling at each other. That's not going to be a thing.
It won't get to that level for
no,
sure.
and like, you will not be calling me a bitch. You will not be calling me crazy. That will not be.
So having healthy
That's
arguments,
unacceptable.
essentially. Learning how to have healthy arguments is
exactly,
like,
exactly. And that's the kind of thing that, like, if that were to happen, depending on the circumstances, I would either immediately walk away or
voice the concern.
or listen, you can't do that.
Yeah.
I'm not okay with that.
Yeah. Exactly. Establish the line in the sand, right?
Right. And so that would be my example of, like, a pretty common boundary that I think people deal with.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what's a boundary to you?
Boundaries, I think whenever somebody thinks of a boundary, people think of, like, a line, a demarcation, a wall, something protective. And it's just that. It's like a protective establishment, essentially, or a protective boundary. It's a protective wall that you've created surrounding a wound that you are working on healing. And there's a difference between, like, a boundary and then just like a hard, like, this is just like a hard pass, this is not okay, like, I will never be okay with this. Boundaries, and I heard this recently, boundaries are supposed to be temporary. They are supposed to surround a wound that you are working on healing, a traumatic event, a situation or circumstance that you are trying to fix, i.e., learning how to healthily argue and be okay in when an argument presents itself and not revert to situations like that, and establishing what is okay to be said in an argument and what is not okay to be said in an argument.
Right.
So it's just healthy establishments to help you fix what was hurt in the past, essentially. But they are supposed to come down. They're not supposed to be there forever. And, like, I think that's the difference. It's like a boundary is something temporary, whereas, like, a hard pass, that hard line in the sand is, like, that is to be, like, never crossed. Like, this is just permanent. So that's my definition.
A lot of people have trouble creating boundaries, right? And I've been one of those people in the past. I've never had a lot of boundaries, especially when it comes to people that I care about. I have never had a lot of issues setting boundaries with my family members. To be completely honest with you, they probably don't like that very much.
I think that's definitely,
I think I'm a little more comfortable setting boundaries with my family members than most people are. A lot of people I've found have issues,
sugarcoat,
especially setting boundaries with their parents, and letting their parents just kind of walk all over them because, oh, well, that's my mom. I have to. No. But anyway, so I don't have that issue with setting boundaries with my family members. Where I have the issue is setting boundaries with my friends and my partners. And I often have a pattern in my life where these people will like just walk on me, you know, and I will just let them because, you know, in the last episode we talked about my previous anxious attachment style, and so that was probably why I was a big people pleaser, and so I just kind of
and confrontation makes
happen.
you like nervous,
right? I hate confrontation.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, and so I was always a person that had very, very little boundaries, and I found that definitely created a lot of issues, clearly, obviously, in my life. So I mean, what kind of advice do you think we should give people on?
I think if it instinctively, you know, when something feels right to you, and if it's not okay, if it hurts your feelings, you are 100% valid in being hurt, and you are also allowed to voice that hurt to the person that hurt you. And if the person does not receive that well or doesn't take responsibility, that's not on you and that's not your fault. Like, they crossed a boundary and that's on them.
Yeah. And I think that, in my opinion, a lot of my advice when it comes to upholding your boundaries or even forming boundaries is not only to write them down. Listen, I'm probably going to tell people to write things down every single episode. I personally am the kind of person that I need to see the words physically to make them like make sense totally, like to see the bigger picture of everything. You know, and so I write everything down. So that's what I was doing.
Vocalized it, like you verbalize or vocalize, either
right.
one of the two. Yeah.
Right. So that's what I was doing when I was trying to figure out what it was that was important to me and what it was that I was looking for and what I wouldn't put up with anymore. You know, and so I had to write it all down. So I suggest that you do that, make those lists. But also, and we'll talk about this, the next episode will be on anger, but I found that harnessing that anger, allowing that anger to exist, and allowing myself to validate the fact that I was angry, because I always had an issue feeling guilty about being angry about people who had hurt me or things that had hurt me or whatever. I always felt guilty about being angry about it. And I would always blame myself. And so what I ended up doing was instead focusing that anger and making it a motivation to uphold that boundary. Like, I don't ever want to feel like that again.
Exactly.
I'm never going to allow myself to be in a situation where that would occur again. You know? And so it really, that button in there, I guess now, is like when something that I have a boundary with now occurs, is this little thought bubble pops up and it's like, no, I remember that and that's not going to happen again. And it really fuels my ability to bring up and go, I'm not okay with this, you know? So I think that that's really helpful. Something else that I wanted to talk about is people relying on their partner to validate and coddle their emotions. Because listen,
sounds
I believe that there is a need for your partner to validate your emotions, okay?
Yes.
Your partner needs to, if you come to them and you say, hey,
be
this
supportive.
thing... Right, or your friend, whatever.
Yeah.
If you go to your friend or your partner and you're expressing something that's making you feel uncomfortable or something that you don't like or something, whatever the case may be, they need to validate your emotions. They need to say, I understand. You know, I get it. That makes sense. I understand why you're feeling that way.
It, as funny as the military expression is, but it needs to be heard, understood, and acknowledged.
Exactly.
And whatever feelings, whatever intention may exist, there needs to be ownership and responsibility. Right. You know what I'm saying? So like there needs to be like, hey, well, I'm sorry for the part that I played in it. Like, I'm sorry, even if I didn't mean to make you feel this way, even if like this was this, I'm sorry for that.
Yes.
Like, it's just like if it's important, if the relationship, if the person is important to you, you care about those boundaries, that when they come to you like, hey, this is not okay.
Exactly. And you respect them.
Yes.
And you want the relationship to continue to be healthy. And so you do, as long as it's not something that is going to be a detriment to your life. You normally, like I personally, have no issue making changes as long as it's not a detriment to me or who I am.
Exactly.
You know, I have no issues making adjustments if that's what's going to make you more comfortable, and that's how I've always been.
And it's never a monologue, it's a conversation.
Yes, but a pattern that I've seen in people is that they tend to expect the other person to change no matter what. Like, the other person is not responsible for your emotions. Your emotions are valid, but the other person is not responsible for it. And you can't expect them to, like these people who expect their significant others to cut off giant chunks of their life because they're uncomfortable, or people who say, you know, have issues with their partners having friends, things like that, like because it makes them uncomfortable. Like, that's not a boundary anymore, you know. That's you trying to make the other person completely conform to what it is that you want. And that's not dating a person.
No.
You know, that's not being with another person. That's just trying to absorb them into your little bubble. And
or you like
they
the
are
idea
their
of
whole
some
person
potential that you
still.
think that they could be, but you're not loving them as they are.
Right. Well, you're not allowing them to be an entire person on their own because you're trying to take away all of the things that don't have anything to do with you. I just feel like a lot of people have problems with expecting their partner to just do everything for them and not have to do any of the work themselves.
To be the emotional punching bag.
Right, so that they don't have to actually do any of the work
for
and
them.
fix
Yes,
themselves.
exactly.
Right.
It's like, oh, I have this person, like they can support the hardship and I can just lean on them and put it all on them. It's like
Exactly.
dump.
You have got to do your work and you have got to fix your stuff.
Yeah.
You have to. It's not the other person's responsibility. And so that brings us back to your point earlier where you were talking about how boundaries should go away.
Yes.
And yeah, absolutely. And that's something that you should discuss with your partner or your friend or whoever is, you know, pushing on that boundary. Is, listen, this is how I'm feeling and this is why I feel this way, and I just would appreciate it if we could come to some kind of compromise, you know, until I figure out how to deal with my anxiety about this situation on my own.
Exactly.
You
and
know?
then once that, then there will be like progression.
Right, exactly. So, I don't know, do you want to talk about how your boundary thing went this weekend?
Yeah. So to preface it, the boundary that I set is in light of being the black sheep of the family. My business is always on blast.
Yeah.
Always. And it is honestly, point blank, I'm just going to say it. Everyone else leads a very, very, very dull life in comparison to me. I'm just going to say it. In the 28 and a half years of my existence, I've had a lot. And a lot of experiences that they were unfamiliar with. And that was not traditional to them. That being said, those became hot topics of conversation amongst my family members. And my entire life was always put on the spotlight to be scrutinized and judged. And if it didn't appear perfect, it was repressed. Whether that was behavior, whether that was emotions, whether that was situations, whether that was actions, whether that was partners, whatever it may be, if it didn't fit the appearance or the aesthetic that my family was going for, it was repressed and suppressed.
Yeah.
So, that being said, I've come a long way. done a lot of work. And I took a huge step and finally got this divorce done. And it was really rough. But I wanted time to process everything because it was a lot.
Right, absolutely.
It's
Getting
very
a divorce is not
It's
a
heavy.
light subject.
It's heavy. It's heavy. And I spent weeks leading up to Thanksgiving expressing to everyone in jest and in seriousness, I can't wait for this holiday, and I'm so looking forward to this holiday because it's going to be the one holiday where I won't be the focal point. I won't be the center of attention. My business will not be talked about. I won't be put on blast.
Yeah, you've said that to me quite a few times.
Quite a few times. And I know that it's one of my cute little quirks that I repeat myself a lot. And I know I repeated it a lot to my mother in particular. Well, that was the boundary right there, folks, is, hey, subtly as an AK-47, don't talk about my shit.
Right.
Point blank.
And she did.
And she did.
and she did in front of a large room full of people.
Yeah, and it wasn't all like super close family. Like it was a lot of like extended family friends and new family members, and honestly, the fact that it had happened 24 hours prior, I thought that there was just more social awareness of the fact that it was
very soon.
It didn't need to be discussed.
Yeah.
And nor did it need to be proclaimed in the celebratory manner of announcing a new baby.
Yeah, wasn't not appropriate.
Exactly. And at the time, the only people that knew were you and my parents and my boyfriend. It was really fresh, really raw to me. And I mean, reliving my entire abusive marriage in the 5 hours that I spent at the courthouse and highlighting the absolute worst parts of it was really like it's reopening an old wound, as you've said. Like it's ripping that Band-Aid right off, and it's like, all right, well, there's a lot of work, there's a lot of scar tissue that I put over that I have to, that's real fresh now that I just picked the scab at.
Yeah.
And like no one is like happier or like more relieved and everything.
Exactly.
But she didn't give me the time to be happy or relieved or process it. And it's not
because it is
like
complicated. It's not a cut and dry celebratory.
Correct.
You didn't get a promotion. You got a divorce.
Yeah, and it was a lot of guilt and shame that I had to put to rest in having that secret, and then being the first divorce in my family, and then like feeling like shame and disappointment in myself. Like there was so much that I had to work through and rehash that I thought I had already worked through. And honestly, like the people that I was closest to there, I hadn't even had the chance to tell them yet, my cousins. Like, and first and foremost, it's my fucking business.
Right.
Like, how are you going to take that away from me? Regardless of the intention, that boundary was crossed without any consideration for my feelings. And in my anger, I tried to take space. And no, I didn't completely cut her off. I still answered her phone calls when she called me every day. But in saying that I needed space in order to process my anger towards you because what you did hurt me and it crossed a boundary, and that in and of itself is me creating an additional boundary for me to work through that, because I was already working through reprocessing and reliving my marriage.
Right.
Now on top of that, I didn't get the peaceful holiday that I envisioned and that I so desperately wanted for the first time in 30 years. But she couldn't even give me that, nor did she have the social grace to be aware of that because she was so lost in her own elation. And it was selfish. And in pointing that out and saying, you crossed this boundary, and I needed to create an additional boundary, i.e. space, so I could process my anger and come to you and not embarrass you in front of everyone like you did to me on Thanksgiving. She point blank said, I don't care about your boundary. And that was hurtful. That in and of itself, honestly, made me lose my shit. I said point blank, if you don't care about my boundaries, you don't care about me. And I think that in and of itself, I felt my throat chakra like release in that statement. I screamed that so violently and so passionately at her. And there was a moment of silence that followed that was deafening. In that, where I was just like, if you don't care about my boundaries, you don't care about me. And it's true for anyone. If someone does not care about your boundaries, regardless of their relation to you, they don't care about you and your feelings.
Absolutely.
And what followed was a repetition of me saying, I am valid in my anger. What you did betrayed me and crossed several boundaries. I am not okay with it, nor will it ever be okay for you to do that to me again. And I know loud and clear she understood and heard that and understands that that cannot happen again.
Yeah.
That my business is not to be spoken about.
Yeah.
Again.
And knowing your mom, most likely it won't be. So
Correct.
Probably won't be a problem then. There you go. Problem solved.
Exactly.
And that's what you have to do. You have to. People are not mind readers. They don't know what's bothering you.
That's
your mom. I told you
thing.
multiple times over the last week or so. Listen, devil's advocate. Your mom's very excited. Your mom's very excited, and I understand why she is.
What?
I would be too if I was in her position. I wouldn't do what she did.
Yeah.
I think that was a bad idea, but
you,
I understand.
You lost me too in a different way to
excitement.
that relationship. Like
Yeah.
and I know that you have an excitement for me to be done with that divorce too, for many different levels. For me, for you, for us, for everything. Like
the difference is that I have been in a similar relationship to yours, and so I understand it from a viewpoint that your mom does not. And as we discussed in the last episode, she may never understand, and you can't make her understand.
There's no empathy
so,
there whatsoever, honestly.
You know, we just have to have some grace.
Yeah.
As we discussed in the last episode.
And that was what I decided. I had the grace to accept her apology towards the end, even though I still have some turmoil over the the apology, but I think regardless of whether I felt like I got what I think the closure I needed from her, I created my own closure in knowing that I was heard, understood, and acknowledged. Those 3 points are the most important things when it comes to setting boundaries, I think, is that when you voice those, make sure that they are heard, understood, and acknowledged.
Absolutely.
You can't get closure from everybody. You aren't going to get the apology that you envisioned from everyone. You aren't going to get the conversation that you thought was going to play out in your head. But if what you can completely control, which is your voice, your words, that's it.
I'm glad that you said that specifically. I would just like to bring up the fact that a lot of people use the term boundaries incorrectly, in my opinion. And the term, the way that they use it typically is, this is my boundary. I don't like it when you do this, so you can't do this.
That's a deal breaker.
It's a boundary. I mean, a deal breaker is a kind of a boundary, but it's, you can't do this. And then the person does, you can't do this. I told you I had this boundary. Mm-hmm. And then I'm sorry, it won't happen again.
And then the person
does it again. No, I told you this is my boundary. You can't do this. Why do you keep breaking my boundaries? And you're making your boundary the other person's responsibility. And this is really important here. What people need to remember is your boundary is not for other people to follow. It's for you to follow. So if you are setting a boundary saying somebody else cannot do something, it is not the other person's responsibility to uphold that end. If they want to continue to be in your life, they will.
Exactly.
They will show you that it is important by doing the thing that you ask them to do, by upholding that boundary.
But it is your
But
responsibility.
if they break that, if they cross that boundary, it is your responsibility to uphold your boundary and walk away.
That's your code of conduct.
Right. And if you don't, then that's not a boundary. That's just you talking out of your ass.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, have one conversation about it. If they do not respect you after one conversation, if they cannot change after one, maybe two, if it's a tricky one, I'll give it maybe 2 times you address it, and then you walk the hell away. They do not respect you, and they are never going to.
Yeah. And it is very situational, but like I think what's important is if you feel, again, you're in control of expressing what your boundary is and upholding that. If you feel that you 100% got everything out, you voiced it clearly, and you heard that person say, I hear you, I understand you, this is what it is, I acknowledge this, and they break that, I think it's done in that moment, right then and there. Because, like...
Yeah, and listen, there's different ways to cut people off or
Of
walk
course.
away, whatever.
There's levels of it, essentially.
Right. When I'm dealing with my friendships, it looks a lot more like distancing. Like, we'll stop hanging out as much, or we'll talk about different topics. I don't trust them with those specific topics anymore. You know, it's just kind of, you just move them to a different level of friendship when they violate things.
Filtering.
You know, it's just...
Yes.
And so that's what it looks like. But you do need to take those steps and stop putting yourself in this situation where you're just reliving the same thing over and over again and expecting the other person to be responsible, again, for your feelings.
Is filtration a form of boundary setting too?
Sure. I'm sure. I don't know if that's a technical term, but we can make it one.
It kind of is, essentially, but like I do the same thing, and I know I don't think you and I are the only people that do that, is when you hear a certain judgment is made, it's like, ooh, okay, that's a certain level that I can't go with that person, like, wall up. So it's like, and new level of filtration out.
I think it's just determining how much you can trust certain people, you know, and I guess that would technically be a boundary, you know, determining how much you can trust somebody.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, you don't trust every one of your friends the exact same. That's stupid.
Yeah.
So
that's real. That's real.
If you have somebody who is willing to communicate with you and who is willing to have that conversation about your boundaries, then do it. And if you don't, then leave.
Yeah. And it's okay, because there are people out there that will hear your boundaries and respect them and love you wholeheartedly.
Yes, absolutely. There are people, I promise you, there are people in the world who will love and respect you enough and want you in their life enough to do what it takes to keep you there. I promise.
Exactly. And will respect whatever boundaries you set out.
All right. Well, that's been Messy Minds. I'm Bri.
Chelsea.
Bye, guys.
Bye. Cheers.